Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Billy Wilder Theater. I'm Claudia Bester, Director of Public Programs. Thank you. It's my great pleasure to introduce today's program with Jason Moran and Naoko Takahatake. Today's conversation is held in conjunction with the Hammer Museum's current Grunwald Center for the Graphic Arts exhibition called Performance on Paper. Performance on Paper features prints and drawings created at the intersection of music and dance by 20 artists active from the 1960s to the present. The exhibition explores how works of art on paper can store sound and movement, becoming lasting visual records of ephemeral sonic and dance experiences. It includes works activated by performance and prints that are physical representations or evocations of music and movement, as well as collaborations between visual artists, musicians, and dancers, and drawings that are the physical trace or embodiment of performance. Artists included in the exhibition include Laurie Anderson, Meredith Monk, Christian Marclay, Tom Marioni, Jenny C. Jones, Ann Hamilton, Channa Horowitz, Julia Phillips, Alan Rupersberg, Candace Williams, and our guest speaker today, Jason Moran. And you can see the exhibition today on the Hammers Gallery level. Admission is free, and it's open until 6 p.m. On Tuesday, July 8th, there will be a tour of the exhibition with curator Naoko Takahatake. And on August 6th, we'll have a talk in the galleries by CalArts Professor of Dance and Performance Studies, Ariel Osterweiss. So now I'm delighted to introduce our guest speakers for today's program. Jason Moran is a jazz pianist, composer, performance artist, educator, visual artist, and curator, born in Houston, Texas in 1975. He began studying piano at age 6 and attended Houston's High School for the Performing and Visual Arts before studying at the Manhattan School of Music, where he earned his degree under the mentorship of Jackie Bayard. Moran was named a MacArthur Fellow in 2010. The same year, he joined the faculty of the New England Conservatory, where he currently teaches. He was inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2022 and serves as a curator at the Park Avenue Armory. He's deeply invested in reassessing and complicating the relationship between music and language, with his extensive efforts in composition, improvisation, and performance, all geared towards challenging the status quo while respecting the accomplishments of his predecessors. His activity stretches way beyond his many recordings and performances with masters of the form, including Charles Lloyd, Bill Frisell, and the late Sam Rivers. His work with his trio, The Bandwagon, has resulted in a distinguished discography with Blue Note Records. He also has vast experience working with venerated and iconic visual artists such as Adrian Piper, Joan Jonas, Glenn Lagon, Stan Douglas, Lorna Simpson, and Kara Walker. His work has been commissioned by many major museums and institutions, including the Walker Art Center, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Dia Art Foundation, the Whitney Museum of American Art, Harlem Stage, and Jazz at Lincoln Center. And just last month, he completed an experimental artist residency in the Film, Animation, and Video Department at the Rhode Island School of Design. For over 20 years, Moran has been collaborating with artists working in painting, video, and performance while developing his own visual arts practice. In addition to installations and multimedia works, Moran has produced a notable body of drawings using the piano as a drawing tool, examples of which are featured in the Hammer's current exhibition, Performance on Paper. Today, Jason Moran is in conversation with Naoko Takahatake, the director and chief curator of the Grunwald Center for the Graphic Arts at the Hammer Museum. Naoko is an art historian and curator with vast experience who's published and lectured widely on such topics as the technical study of the printmaking process, print publishing, collecting, and historiography. She has a BA from Vassar College and a master's and PhD from Oxford. Prior to the Hammer, she was curator of prints and drawings at the Getty Research Institute and at LACMA prior to that, and she's the curator of the wonderful exhibition upstairs. After today's conversation, we invite you to join us for complimentary coffee, tea, and cookies out in the theater lobby. And now please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Jason Moran and Naoko Takahatake.
Good afternoon, Jason.
Good morning.
Thanks for being here. And thank you all for being with us here at the Hammer this afternoon. It's really a pleasure to be able to share a stage with you.
My pleasure.
I will just start by giving some context for our conversation, and Jason will be doing most of the talking and certainly all of the piano playing today.
Well, hold on. Wait, did you take piano lessons as a...
I was a Suzuki violin child.
So I took Suzuki piano. So they have a violin back there they're going to bring out, and then you're going to play, and then it's going to be like a new piece. I was joking. There's no violin backstage. No. Okay, I'm sorry.
Taking this to the next level.
Sorry.
Everyone saw the look of horror in my face. So just a few words of introduction to add to what Claudia already shared. Jason Moran's multidisciplinary practice redefines the boundaries between music, performance, and visual art. Central to his practice is a deep investment in honoring the legacies of jazz, celebrating jazz as a vital force in Black culture and American life, and reimagining its potential futures. Through an expansive approach to form, Moran creates genre-defying work where sound, image, and history converge. Sound and music are embodied experiences, material and emotional, and improvisation becomes not just a musical method, but also a conceptual framework. His visual work often evokes the intimacy of live performance and preserves the ephemeral gestures of music making. An impulse to explore the transformative potential of collaboration across disciplines has led to projects with such artists as we heard, as Joan Jonas, Carol Walker, Lorna Simpson, Glenn Ligon, Stan Douglas, Carrie Mae Weems, Adam Pendleton, Theaster Gates, Julie Meritu, as well as Ava DuVernay, Martha Graham Dance Company, Lines Ballet, and I just learned in the green room something forthcoming with Haruki Murakami. As a jazz innovator and experimental art maker, he expands the spaces where music can exist and deepens our understanding of its role in shaping identity, history, and creative expression. So today we're here in the context of performance on paper. Around the mid-20th century, as artists introduce innovative approaches to their printmaking and drawing practices, musicians broke with traditional structures, instruments, and performance spaces. These parallel transformations shifted and dissolved disciplinary boundaries, as does the work of Jason. New possibilities for interpreting and transcribing time-based expressions emerged, responding to the abiding artistic challenge to produce lasting records of ephemeral phenomena. Jason's featured work in the exhibition are vivid materializations of his musical thinking, and I'm delighted to be in conversation today to explore his practice and its resonance with themes in performance on paper, from prints and drawings that record performance through the physical trace of gesture, to scores and notations that map sound and generate performance, and to works as sites of creative convergence. Jason, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
It's good to be in LA.
Well, I should say welcome back to the stage here at the Hammer. So as I said, I'm going to start with the question that artists really find it difficult to open with, and so I do apologize, but I'm going to start with the biggest question, which is to ask you to introduce us to your creative practice and the role of the visual within it.
Thankfully, I grew up in a house that looked like that. Meaning, like, none of this, I think, is possible without relationship to my parents and their complete love for all kinds of art making in general. And though they weren't artists, their passion for it was evident everywhere. So it's evident in how my mother, it's like looking over my shoulder at my too long of a hand for a 9-year-old. But she wasn't a pianist, but she was the one who was in lessons every day, writing down the notes from the lessons on paper. So for me, paper always held something much more powerful than actually what was on it was the intention in it. the writing on paper for me was such a powerful sound that one lesson, a Suzuki lesson, I interrupted my mother and said, "You've got to stop." That's fucked up. One should not tell their parent to stop anything, let alone take lessons during, excuse my language, I'm sorry, let alone notes about things I could improve, dynamics, fingering, rolling, legato, etc. But the sound was and I'd like be trying to move forward in my lesson, but I just heard this out of my left ear. And I don't regret saying something to my mother because then it became a piece much later in my life. Meaning I wrote a letter to my mother and I used the sound of writing on paper as almost like as a drum to a piece of music that I recorded, a Suzuki piano piece, to kind of make that full circle. But it's that relationship to paper is kind of embedded in kind of just the normal everyday. And so this is how I learned piano. And then the person who made me fall in love with piano is a musician named Thelonious Monk. And as a teenager, I hated piano. By the time I was 12 or 13, you got to get this thing away from me because it's boring. I'm practicing it by that window and I'm looking outside and I see my friends riding their bikes and skateboards up and down the street, yelling at each other. And I'm sitting inside playing Mozart. And I couldn't think of a more terrible lifestyle. And my parents could care whether or not I thought that. They just thought you should figure out how to practice. And practice became much easier once I heard Thelonious Monk. And this is how avid a fan I was and am of Thelonious Monk. I consider him the best musician, period. And he is the mark of which I measure every other musician. It's his sensibility as a composer. It's the way he touches the piano. It's the way he dances. It's the precise language he uses around his music. Sometimes it's very limited in public, but in private, it's verbose. And I'll play you the sound that kind of cracked my brain open. It was the opening phrase to the song Round Midnight. And I walked into my parents' room, and they were watching television. And there was a plane crash which held some U.S. delegates, one of which was from Houston named Mickey Leland. And he was a friend of my parents, and he died in this plane crash. And so they were watching this news story, and no sound was coming from the television. It was just Thelonious Monk. Somehow they chose Monk. So I walked into the room, and I'll play the song. I mean, I played that first because at that same time that I was falling in love with his music, there was a documentary called Straight No Chaser that came out. And so all of a sudden, you could go into a big screen and see Thelonious Monk playing. And that felt like a revelation. And this is the same corner that you see in the beginning of the slideshow with my mother. This is Ellis Marcellus, the father of the Marcellus family, sitting down at the piano, teaching me a lot. And this is my relationship that will go for the rest of my life. But behind me is a drawing by John Biggers. And my parents knew John Biggers really well, and they collected a lot of his work. So I grew up with this intricate relationship to crayon and pencil on paper as like all over the house. And John Biggers was also the teacher of my uncle, my father's brother, Joseph Moran, who also has an incredible practice as an artist. So in my house, it was kind of like this painting, Shotguns, we lived with, was around. And so there's always a sense of community making that I felt like was evident not just in the music that jazz brings you as a community, who you play with and then who you play for, but also in the drawings and the paintings my parents had all around the house, that these were real people. Third Ward, Houston, has shotgun houses, as they are all throughout the South. And so you had a sense of not only what the house represented, what the grid represents, what the women represent who stand in the front of it, what the artist means and the symbolism inside all of it. That was all kind of apparent, even as a kind of a kid trying to get my piano skills together. But that community leads me to talk just a brief bit about my relationship to, the first thing was trying to remake stages that don't exist anymore. So this is the Savoy Ballroom from the 1920s in Harlem. And so to reconsider the way jazz that we understand it now, where people sit down, was not so 100 years ago. It was an active form of music that inspired and innovated dance moves, and let alone allow people to come together and rejoice at a time when there was much oppression happening. So the Savoy Ballroom is like that. And so what I was fixating on was the bandstand in the back of this photo and this curved ceiling, which I could not imagine what it felt like for these big bands from Ella Fitzgerald, all these bands that would play there, what it felt like to have an audience dancing, but also be sending sound out from this arc, and the sound also funneling back into the performers from the dancers' footsteps. And so this was an attempt to remake the Savoy Ballroom stage. And that led me to think about not only the live concerts that I would hear from great jazz clubs, which most musicians we fixate on. Oh my gosh, Max Roach is at the Three Deuces on 52nd Street in New York City in 1947. But where is this place? What is that place? When we started talking about this room, the thing I recall most that I think is so special about this room is how dry it is. And I mean dry sound-wise. Like, it doesn't echo anywhere. This is a characteristic of this room, of this space, versus the characteristic acoustically of the bathroom.
And you remembered that very precisely as soon as you stepped on stage to do the sound check.
It's the fingerprint of the room is how it sounds, how it feels, how does sound live in the space. So I was imagining that about this club and this photograph by Herman Leonard of Max Roach. Like, what is Max Roach playing? The drums, the instrument taken away from enslaved African people. He's playing the drums in a padded corner. What does that mean for this revolutionary drummer playing with Miles Davis and Charlie Parker in this low ceiling corner padded room? What are we saying? I was shocked by it because we had just come from the Savoy Ballroom 15 years earlier. So how is this music changing, the evolution of it? So this is the drummer I play with for the past 25 years. This is Nasheet Waits, who is the godson of Max Roach in the Three Deuces that is now in the collection of the Virginia Museum of Arts. And then this is the most recent one for Sam Rivers and his wife Beatrice Rivers. They made a space in New York City called Rivby Studios, and it was part gallery, part rehearsal space, part gathering space, and he had countless concerts there in the 70s. And so this was an attempt to pull back forward these places, these venues that don't exist anymore. This is in Massamoka now in Massachusetts. And I guess we should pause for a second to talk about some people I love and the way that they use paper.
Absolutely. So we have a selection of works here by David Hammonds. You've talked about touch, and I know you'll get into this a bit more. The embodied experience of performance, the residue of performance. These are all terms that you've talked about. Don't know if you want to say something specific about these works or about Glenn Ligon. The slide that's coming up, of course, is Norman Lewis.
Right. I mean, for Hammonds is a music lover. And I guess maybe also one thing that comes up with my relationship to collaborators is how much they love music. And I mean, really love music. And it's not that they try to become musicians, but they want to experiment with sound. And Hammonds is such a close relationship with people like Cecil Taylor and Ornette Coleman and Henry Threadgill, and he's really part of the community of musicians. And but always Hammonds has a way of making the most the power of I dare say simplicity is as powerful as the way Thelonious Monk would write a composition that seemed to give so much space to the performer and the listener at the same time. Hammonds has this ability to do that. And for me, maybe my single largest influence is Norman Lewis. And just his relationship not only to the way he works paper in the 40s and 50s and 60s, but then he was also able to find this delicacy with painting on canvas as well. And his relationship to demanding that abstraction, which the jazz form is tantamount to survival, and its relationship to Black people, and the demand that people understand that as well, rather than only representation. And Norman Lewis, his record collection is just a bunch of jazz records, and so these people are part of the community to me. And as much as I would want to couch them in art history, I just really think of them as music historians too. That's where we're going.
So thank you, and we'll shift gears slightly to bring out some themes within the exhibition. One being the graphic score and notational forms that map sound and encode meaning and frame performance. And framing is something that you also speak about. There are examples in this exhibition of scores by John Cage, Meredith Monk, and Raven Chacon. On the screen is our works by Meredith Monk and Raven Chacon. And these are works that embrace indeterminacy, improvisation, and audience participation. They're works that push against and also interrogate the boundaries of traditional Western musical notation. What are their limits? What are their possibilities? I think in the case of Meredith Monk, she also talks about, as you do, the way in which it's not possible to separate sound from space, and so she's able to visualize sound in that way. Can you talk about the role of scores in composition and performance? And also, you've touched a little bit about on paper, but the role of paper or significance of paper in composition and literacy.
Yeah, I mean, first, if I just start with Duke Ellington answers a lot of these questions. Duke Ellington was an art student who just decided not to go to Pratt. Like, he got accepted and decided, I'm playing piano. And oftentimes when I think about Duke's relationship to literacy, it often goes under discussed, because I think for Black musicians, you still have to keep in mind that literacy means death. For hundreds of years, it meant death. So what is it to say when all of a sudden Duke Ellington comes on stage with 18 musicians all reading scores? Meanwhile, at the very same time, Louis Armstrong's band comes on stage playing equally as intense music with no score. It's just this, it's very slight to me, but the literacy component about who decides to write it down means a lot. Right now, I've been spending the past a year and a half playing the music of Ellington. And I've been traveling it around to different ensembles to play it. And partially the reason it can get played because it was written down. And the reason we have Mozart and Puccini and we listen to all that Beethoven over and over again is because they wrote it down. And so there's just something about that writing down that we never really know how it will manifest later once the artist isn't present anymore. But so that's why I have this. This is a photograph Gordon Parks took of Ellington with his incredible pencil. I mean, it's an incredible pencil. It's an incredible eraser. And this is one of his scores for a piece called Later from the Controversial Suite. Just a good title. And I'd say, like, thinking about the Meredith Monk, right, we're looking at those lines on the paper. So, but what do Ellington's lines mean, right? Like, the band understands that, but for, say, a person, you know, just walks in and says, okay, well, what do those lines mean? Well, some of them mean repeat, some of them don't mean repeat. What does it mean when there's nothing on the staff? Does it mean the musician doesn't play anything? Not true. And so the code becomes a thing that musicians have to start to understand. And maybe one of the great things about looking at scores is it often reveals something can be much more powerful than the composer could ever write down on paper. And so the score for this incredible recording by John Coltrane starts out like this. So A Love Supreme, 4 songs that for me change and mark the progress of humanity, as far as I'm concerned. But this is the schematic for it. It all fits on one sheet, you know? And so we're looking at Ellington using this grand score. We're looking at John Coltrane use this grand score and achieving 2 very different things. And whether or not Coltrane showed this to the band is a detail I wonder about. Like, did McCoy Tyner, Elvin Jones, and Jimmy Garrison see this schematic? And I believe they did. I believe that's the kind of artists they are. And that's why they were able to actualize something so powerful that we still listen to it today. This is a cousin of mine and a friend and a great musician, Martina Roberts, who's down at UCSD, and one of her graphic scores, as well as Wadada Leo Smith and one of his graphic scores. Each to have their own strategies for the way they work through the page. And in traditional ways of understanding music, we start from top left and move to bottom right. But in this, we get to map a navigation method. And I'd say from both of those musicians, we start to understand that there is a way to move through life that always does not fit on the grid. And that's always been an important part. Another artist is Louis Armstrong. And these are a set of collages, of which he did 500, that live at the Louis Armstrong Museum in Queens, New York, in Astoria. And Armstrong was kind of ahead of his time because not only would he write obsessive letters back and forth to his fans, so he carried a typewriter on the road with him. He carried a camera with him. He carried a film camera with him, like a 8mm. And then he also made these collages of tapes that he would listen to in his room. So he was like, he did not like the normal Scotch tape cover, and he spent time repurposing himself. And I'd say these are some of the most incredible set of collages I've seen, but these are in New York, and they rarely ever go out for exhibitions. But if you're ever in New York, please make time to visit Louis Armstrong's house, because as a kind of artist, maybe I'm trying to say that so many musicians really do have a serious visual practice, and that I'm just part of that tribe that continues to work that way. My teacher, Jackie Bayard, often made drawings for the covers of each of the pieces of music he made, all pencil on paper, each one of them. And so much so that there was an exhibition called Blues for Smoke that was on view, maybe it was at LACMA, I don't know, maybe over 10 years ago. The curator, Bennett Simpson, was obsessed with Jackie Bayard. And I said, Bennett, you've got to have some of Jackie Byard's drawings in the show. So all that to say, I come from that. And these are my people. And here's Louise Bourgeois manipulating the manuscript paper. And maybe that's kind of what I love so much is the different ways people use those lines to kind of unlock something else that is not necessarily beneath or above the page, but kind of embedded. And Louise was also making some music too. You seen that video where she like takes the plate and bashes it on the ground? Sound.
And the staff lines become a structure, right? And you've talked about the grid, and they become a structure. In the work in the exhibition by Jenny C. Jones, she's really trying to in a metaphorical way, I think about structure and improvisation by juxtaposing staff lines and her gestural marks to reference the kind of gesture of sound, the gesture and texture of sound, but also as a way of thinking about improvisation on top of structure.
Yeah, and Jenny, also makes these incredible sound works, where she would slow down to a crawl a Billie Holiday recording, like lengthening the time of which we have become accustomed to listening to them on an LP or MP3, like at a certain speed. A recording is at a speed, and sometimes slowing down the speed unlocks something else. I feel that way, that she is thinking about time specifically, that the manuscript paper is also really a timekeeper. And though you're working through it, each artist or musician, unless they have a little something in the top left corner that says this is how fast or slow to play something, it's almost at your discretion. It's why we go see different conductors conduct a piece, is because they have a different way to move through a song. And but I often think about people like Louise or Christian Marclay, like who want to interrogate the line paper, because it is a structure worth erupting.
Well, let's turn now to your paperworks. A theme in the exhibition is how artists have sought to make a permanent record of ephemeral phenomena. And for, I think, over a decade now, you have been making these paperworks using the keyboard as a drawing instrument, and which are the residue of musical performance. These works capture and map your somatic gestures. They trace progress. They chart time. I think of the accumulation of the pigment as a way of marking time. And they give graphic and really sculptural presence to sound. In some works, for example, on the left, you really have the piano keys are clearly articulated. In others, they're submerged in these vaporous pigment layers. Something that's fascinating to me is that the transcription of your musical action, so this is the sole record of the performance, in that you don't record it in sound, they're just visual transcriptions of your performance, and your musical action didn't result in a finished musical work, but in a finished visual work of art. And here, just a couple of other examples that are in the exhibition. I would love for you to talk a little bit about the process of making these works.
Messy. And I'd say that was not something I was ready for. I mean, at some point we'll talk about people who kind of unlocked that in me, and I'd say most specifically Joan Jonas and her relationship to paper, and our nearly 20-year relationship as a close collaborator to this day. Watching her manipulate paper was like finishing school, because Joan uses it to capture aspect of the performance. And I maybe feel in the same way I was talking about clubs being a kind of way of holding the music that happens in a space. The instrument also is responding to the interaction of the musicians. If a saxophonist has many components to put their saxophone together, when they put the reed in their mouth and then they attach that to the saxophone, to the horn, and they begin to give pressure to that, there's pressure involved with how they bite. We don't see that, but it's internal for them. The way that they breathe within this little gap, that's incredible. In the way that they use their body. So how do we measure that? You know, I was here playing, I can't remember the name of this hall, playing a concert, and I went on stage with the phone recording in my pocket, and it mostly recorded the sound of my jacket against the phone. And I thought, oh yeah, we're recording the wrong things. Sometimes I think we're recording the wrong thing. And I think this is a way to start to, I just wanted to make sure that I was trying to capture as many recording possibilities. And so some of these works examine that. This is also from the exhibition in Mass MoCA. And these are, they're just continuations. And I say that maybe when I first started, I used to think that it should be a song, and I moved further and further away from that. The works upstairs are pretty.
They're early
I'm
works.
still in my early phase, thank God. And I keep wanting to see where this is all heading, and so the paper is draped over the manual, which is separated from the piano itself. It's just the keys and the hammers, and so it's separated from its breathing device, and the pigment is put onto the paper, and then it's really a relationship, a kind of a dance with not only how does the paper respond to the pressure, because a pianist's most distinct fingerprint is their touch. It's not the sound they make, it's the touch. And because the instrument sits there, we think that every pianist who sits down will get the same sounds. No, it's not the case. There's something that gets registered from the body in the relationship to this. If I'm just gonna do, like that's that, but if I do it with this, but the thud is still a part of the sound. Those things are related. And so then that pressure, if I think about all my favorite pianists, the way they pressure into the instrument is absorbing so much. And so how do we start to record some of those relationships, and what is the impact of trying to get the pigment off of the paper? And I think of that as more as a relationship to the room. Want to try one? Thanks for that collaboration.
I did the hard work.
Yeah, so I think there are more marks of of taking care of a time, and I think oftentimes we, as musicians, we really invest in the sound, which is our main concern. But I have spent a lot of time over the past 20 years really trying to have a bit of a mapping of what was left behind also. And so the works kind of like, not only are they about kind of like making sure that I also see what else is out there, but that I keep a record of it. And maybe some of it gets seen in public, maybe some of it doesn't. But all of my people that I mentioned, Muhal, Richard Abrams, Henry Threadgill, Jerry Allen, these people make visual work, and often the public doesn't see it. And so, this is kind of like looking at the way that some of those gestures that we hear, then what is it? What is the trace that the key feels?
The pressure and the direction.
The direction, the pressure, the down, the up, the across, the glissando, the smear, taking another gander I saw the Noah Davis show in London, but seeing it here and seeing works that were not in the show in London or in Berlin, but seeing it here, seeing the way that some of this, the look of decay, and that effect. So these are just marks of of moments passing. And this is the way I used to work. Y'all don't even know what snow is, right? Maybe you do, actually. Well, I'm fucking around. I'm sorry. But we used to get snow in the east, in the East Coast. I worked in the back of my in-laws' house in Stamford, Connecticut. And outside was the best kind of also collaborator, because if it was too windy outside, I couldn't work with the pigment, for it would fly everywhere. And so this is the way that it really began, especially in the pandemic, working outside and making my son dance. And these are the 3 manuals that I've used. The one on the top is the oldest, the one in the middle is the second oldest, and the one on the bottom is the most recent. And so when I say manual, the manual is removed from the instrument, meaning like this, the ones you can't see it really, but this whole section, this is just, it slides out, and you bring the hammers with it. So the hammers don't have anything to bounce against string-wise, but that becomes a way for me not to destroy pianos. And so these are works that are in the studio now. This is made with Duke Ellington's signature plate. And these are an attempts at something Joan Jonas might make. But that's.
And it's the capacity of the breath also, I think, in the process when you're taking the manual out of the instrument.
Yeah, and there's something about pianos themselves as recording devices. The piano is an old bit of technology that still works really well. And people continue to find new things to try to add on, but they're really add-ons, plug-ins. But the instrument itself does tremendous amount of things. But I think the components from taking a tour of the Steinway factory, not only in the one in Queens, New York, but the one in Hamburg, Germany, we start to see kind of like how these parts are related to one another. And then that's maybe my chance to try to, I've convinced Steinway to give me countless sets of manuals. And they delivered this piano today. Can I say one thing for the hammer?
Yes.
I would love to be on the team of people who purchases pianos for museums. So you don't have to rent them.
All right. Well, whoever it is that makes that decision and is listening, I hope. Well, we're very grateful that we...
Oh my God, are we going to talk about Hiromi paper?
Yes, we are. Well, I thought we would move. You talked about the process. Let's talk about the materials.
Yeah.
Well, I know we're going to focus a bit more on the paper, but I just want to mention the blue tones, right? That's really where you started, and that's expanded a bit in your abstractions on paper. They're mostly using these blue pigments, which of course is rich in musical associations.
Yeah, I challenge us to find another form of music as potent as the blues, and especially here for what it registers as an escape hatch for a lot of people, and then it has a tradition not only within this land but other lands around the world of what the color unlocks, and in the same way that a pigment like a blue pigment unlocks is also the same way a frequency in song unlocks too. Ellington often wrote some of his most intimate and, for me, heart-grasping songs in the key of D flat, and he does this on purpose. He's locating the frequency that unlocks emotionally for people when they hear it, and that's a thing that a lot of musicians are whether they discuss it publicly or not, are keenly aware of which frequency unlocks not only the musicians on the stage, but unlocks the audience as well. And when you work through a set of songs in a given night, any band or orchestra is really moving you through a set of emotions related to the frequencies that they're putting together from the instruments that play them. And so, yes, that blue is almost like it's the black. It's the base source of definitely everything that I play.
And so there's the blue pigment, and then you have been using Japanese paper, in particular from Fukui, which is, just to situate that, that's on the west coast of Honshu, so the main island of Japan, so on the Japan sea coast. It's maybe 2 hours from Kyoto. And you'll share some photos, but just perhaps you can start here, which is your print collaboration with Jacob Samuel, who's a printer here in Los Angeles. And this work is in the exhibition, and I understand it is Jacob who made the introduction to Hiromi Katayama and of Hiromi paper. So I'll let you explain, tell us more about that.
Yeah, well, in the same way that I spoke of artists loving music and becoming music historians themselves, Jacob Samuel is a supreme music lover, and his knowledge about jazz is insane. And so we had a conversation because my gallerist, Roland Augustine, is a pianist. He plays Fats Waller, like he knows how to, for real. But he said, you should meet Jacob because Jacob does these editions with all kinds of artists.
Including the project in the exhibition, Meredith Monk.
So I came out to LA and we had an afternoon together where we talked about a lot of music, and then he started to show these relationships, which are, for me, like beautiful collaborations with artists. And way of charting these folks. And so after our long conversation about music, he said, I want to take you somewhere. And he brought me to Hiromi paper because I had brought him some paper that I wasn't so sure about how it was registering the touch. And he said, I have some place to take you. And he brought me there. And then we walked through the store feeling paper. And I kind of named the things that I'm looking for. I think I need something that's tough, but also shows its wrinkle. And it's not afraid to show its wrinkle, but also captures everything, you know? And so he brought me to the Gampi selection. And then I started spending all my money buying this paper from Hiromi Paper. And every trip to LA, I go buy to get more paper because I keep learning more. And just as we do with an improvisation, you know, the great thing is there's almost no turning back. I rarely kind of come back to something to try to see what else. That's something I'm working past in my own hang-up about is how to come back to something, which in a song you kind of can't come back to. But
with the visual,
you can. So I'm also appreciative to Jacob for bringing me by to develop this relationship. And this was my trip last summer. With my family, we went out to Fukui and met with the Iwano paper mill, who were making this pink paper that you've been frequently seeing.
And we'll have a few details, shots of those as well.
And so watching paper being made, plants being pulled apart slowly by hand, I don't know, I wish... I'm thankful that I have a lifestyle that requires the hand. Let me say that, and really deeply requires it because that tactile information is necessary. So this was the two colors of paper of pink that I was working with for the Mass Mocha exhibition that they made, and I'm so happy to be to meet them. And this is the size of paper that I love most. Watching these two women
in their dance.
It is truly a dance watching them level this together. Synchro. You know, my wife, when she saw this poster, she said, they don't look happy. She was like, they are working. It's very much like I felt, you know, paper, watching paper being made not in some massive factory spewing smoke, you know. There was just something about the intimacy of every sheet. And I would say that when I returned to the studio, I had to have more care about how I was manipulating every sheet because I just saw the 8 people who made it, you know, and it's one by one. And so that mass thing is humbling.
It's one by one. It's a process. Japanese paper is from plant-based, and so there is the stripping of the plant, and then you need to prepare the fibers. What a distinguishing characteristic of these Japanese papers is the fact that the paper fibers are very long, and so that's what creates that ability to make a paper that is quite thin, but also structurally very strong. And so we'll see that, I think, in these details. I think of your work both as graphic but also sculptural. And the way in which this paper is able to hold that is essential, as you say, under the attack of your playing, of your touch.
And I do really think of the paper as a room, as a space with acoustic properties. The paper has an acoustic property, like the room does. So if I send sound into the room, sending pigment onto the paper takes care of how it's registering it. Whether it slides the pigment right off, or whether it captures every little grain has now a home. And I keep looking for something to be consistent, but much like moving the music around the world, as I do as a traveling musician, and many musicians do, we know that every time you bring the music to another room, you kind of got to work with the room. And so every sheet of paper, even though it can be from the same mill, does feel actually like brand new. And that part I appreciate because it just allows me, just slows me down a bit versus just dive right in. And then we get to see how the paper wants to fold or doesn't want to fold. And maybe one of the bigger things that for me is always the kind of dismount is how to get the pigment off of the paper. I don't apply any fixative to fix anything into place. I really let it just live and fall off slowly over time, or dust it off to see what wants to stay. But that's the room. That's the room's quality, the paper's quality.
I think we have a few more examples of these works on this
And this was
paper from
the visit to Fukui was really about wanting to get a glimpse at the indigo versions of the papers they were making, and this is what I'm trying to work on now. And this is how it feels now I have a studio space. I don't work outside anymore. My in-laws are like, you gotta get that shit out of here. They love it, but they're like, you got to go. Anyway, so this is in the studio on the clean side, as I say.
I think what's wonderful about seeing these images, Jason, also, you pointed to the fact that the work in the exhibition, so the 4 works are from around 2019, 2020. Just the ambition and scale has really shifted in these works in the intervening years.
Yeah, but we were talking earlier about Goya and the intimacy of a small piece, the way it you have to stand close to it, and I think in the scale of music and musicians that I love and venues that I love, say for instance the Village Vanguard in New York City, is the audience must be close to the music. The Hollywood Bowl, the exact opposite. It's gorgeous as a place it is to listen to music and perform in, but it's the exact opposite. So what are the venues that have incredibly revolutionary music that you must sit close to watch it happen? And so scale, like I keep wanting to move larger, but really I feel most at home with something like about the size of the piano itself. It's just, it's where I feel most home.
Well, I think the intimacy is never lost, though, because your touch is always there.
Yeah.
We're going to now shift gears a little bit. So we've talked about how your work itself is kind of crosses boundaries, but you have done that hand in hand with other artists. the exhibition really illustrates the way in which works on paper can become very fertile sites for cross-disciplinary collaboration. And you've worked with artists with visual artists in ways that generate new work. You've also performed in response to their work, which offers new interpretive layers and pathways to their work, to the appreciation and understanding of what they have done. I'd love for you to talk about these collaborations. We've sort of singled out two examples, which to my mind are different approaches, generative in very different ways. And I think something that's interesting to me is the way in which you have spoken about the collaboration with visual artists has led you to perform outside of traditional spaces. And how has that shifted your approach as a pianist and as a jazz artist?
I'd say in the simplest way, I just want to hear what it sounds like somewhere else. Like actually, after this, I'm going to the Underground Museum. Underground Museum is kind of soft reopening tonight to play a performance at 7 o'clock outside. And because Noah Davis has this incredible painting called Concerto, which he has a pianist sitting outside at an intersection with a piano in the street. And it's important for musicians to move the music around. And it's great to have an MP3 or listen through headphones, but it's nothing like making the music in other spaces. So working with someone like Joan Jonas in Dia Beacon, which is this incredible museum with this vast space, which is more like a parking garage for 18-wheelers, that was my practice room. And so when I hear a piano in there with like a 20-second delay, that's not playing in this room where there's no delay. And so all of a sudden, the kinds of songs that I write for Joan Jonas are closely tied to where we're working. And that for me feels something akin to maybe the way Duke Ellington worked with his band. He wrote for the musicians in his band, not just the third trumpet player or the fourth trumpet player, but they were related. And so meeting these two women, Adrian Piper and Joan Jonas, in around 2005 is life-changing. And they are on a record I made called Artist in Residence. And because I think of them as important as Thelonious Monk to me in my development, in my growth. And so this piece I'm going to play now, this is Adrian Piper giving me something to think about.
Artists ought to be writing about what they do and what kinds of procedures they go through to realize a work, what their presuppositions in making the work are, and related things. If artists' intentions and ideas were more accessible to the general public, I think it might break down some of the barriers of misunderstanding between the art world and artists and the general public. I think it would become clear the extent to which artists are just as much a product of their society as anyone else with any other kinds of vocation. Artists ought to be writing about what they do and what kinds of procedures they go through to realize a work, what their presuppositions in making the work are, and related things. If artists' intentions and ideas were more accessible to the general public, I think it might break down some of the barriers of misunderstanding between the art world and artists and the general public. I think it would become clear the extent to which artists are just as much a product of their society as anyone else with any other kinds of vocation.
Yeah, so Adrian, like, I think for all my years at Manhattan School of Music, intention was not a word ever discussed. And so meeting artists who were talking about intention was a little frightening. I hadn't been to enough therapy yet to talk about my intention. And I had to start to learn about it. And Adrian and Joan were really helping me get my feet situated, or resituating my feet. And that there may be more to explore. Yeah.
Well, let's also, I think, in through these collaborations, I mean, there is the personal relationship in it, and I think you wanted to share. I think it's the next. This is this short clip here, which reveals just the strength of that conversation.
Yeah, this is Joan Jonas and I at Documenta, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. But we're in the middle of working on a piece called Reanimation. Did you hear it? Yeah. Did you hear it? It's very subtle.
You just decide when you're done.
There should be a sound signal. I think Jason should time it.
That too?
Yeah.
Because I'm no judge of how interesting it is for how long.
And I'm coming from this sound. So it goes down, it goes up. Many times. Then I also play it here. I feel like I can, next time we do it, then I'll be conscious of the time.
It's better if we don't try to be exact, because then it'll look wrong. Just think of the idea like this: we're totally involved in this, and we don't know, where we are, and all of a sudden it changes, and we're still doing it.
Right.
But that's okay.
Right. Okay.
Because in the next sequence, there's so much time.
And I trust Joan in these spaces. I trust Joan to also allow me to play what she thinks I need to play. Like, she many times say, "Oh, well, Jason, you have to play too." Like she almost says that shit because she wants to hear me play. And she always says, "I get way more inspiration from listening to your music than ever looking at my videos." So she's like, "I need you to play. Don't feel like you have to end or start, just be in it." Those reminders are good to hear.
But the thing is that you don't have to reflect what you think might be the feeling. You should just... I mean, people are coming to hear you and to see the whole thing, but they were going to listen to you. So what you should do is, I'm going to also respond to you. Yeah, Joan is kind of ferocious that way. But also, earlier when I was saying watching her relationship to paper is like maybe the closest I have to watching a master work with paper, countless times, and making countless drawings and practicing in her home, and then practicing on stage during rehearsal, and then having 40 pieces of paper to do. During that piece that I'm playing right now, she does a series of bird drawings, about 40 of them, in the length of time that I play this song. About 40 fast bird drawings. Like as an action, those then become, that's where I started to see the residue of the performances. She flings them when she's done. Flings it, and then this pile, this flock of birds becomes, they still live. And so these are the drawings, these are partially some of her drawings here.
And this is a very different kind of collaboration. So this is Julie Meritu painting in working on her commission for SF MoMA in 2017, Howl Eon 1 and 2. And this is a relationship that, I could have pulled out many other examples, but what I thought was interesting to talk about in this case is it's a very different kind of collaboration between the visual and the music, in the sense that here you're not part of the performance. You performed while Julie was painting, and then you also wrote a score while she was painting. I understand this project came up quite organically, so it wasn't part of the original conception. So I'd love for you to talk about that.
Sure. I mean, I will back up for a second to talk about the importance of the Harlem Renaissance. I live in Harlem. I will always live in Harlem because of not only its relationship, but most specifically its relationship to piano history and the way it lives uptown in New York. That I'll always live in Harlem. And Julie also lives in Harlem. Many other great artists live in Harlem. And so often we would meet at a place called Sylvia's uptown and have breakfast. It was breakfast at Sylvia's. And Julie came in and I said, I'm closing my studio and I kind of need a place to store some of these instruments that I can't bring back to my apartment. And she said, oh, bring them by this church I'm working in, which is where she was making these paintings. And then when I walked in, I thought, oh my God. And it became a place to compose as she was painting. I would go in an afternoon while she was high up on her lift, smudging something or erasing a mark or putting another one in its place, and start to find not only the resonant qualities of the room that she's making these pieces in, so the key of A flat was the resonant tone of that room, to start to try to find the spaces and which songs and which marks and which phrases would registering in the room versus what was registering on in her painting, and watching her work through and remove and work through and remove was also helpful to see as a and that was my workspace, a Rhodes in the balcony.
And these are really truly monumental in scale. I mean, the slide you showed before gives you a sense of that.
And this was the score that emerged, and then we recorded a record in there before they removed the paintings with a drummer, Jamire Williams, and a cornetist, Graham Haynes. And it became a record that we named the same Howl Eon that Julie named the painting. But it was a way to continue to think about, like, that's not a recording studio. It's to get rid of the part of these notions that it had to go into a recording studio to make this. Is that if you make a recording anywhere, then that is the recording studio. Even if the recording studio is in my pocket rubbing around, that's the recording studio in the room. And documenting these kinds of relationships in maybe the more unconventional ways is something where my head is. Maybe the last thing that I'll add in that unconventional way is, for all these years playing at the Village Vanguard, which is approaching 100 years in the 30s, in 2030s, it'll be 100 years old. And 2 years ago, I invited a seismologist into the Village Vanguard to record the seismic activity of my band. And that's the new record that's coming out. It's just the seismic activity. I don't think it sounds good, but that's not the point. The point is that there are other ways to document what we do, the way we shake, the way we settle. All those are documented in the device that was set onto the stage and literally recorded 8 sets of us playing. And those are the kinds of activities, I mean, you all are here in this environment where you constantly are registering. There are pods in the ground all over the place registering the seismic activity. But I also want to think about the seismic activity of bands and the way bands really do let people loose. They let structures free. They free structures. They offer things that no politician could ever get across. And they're often uncredited. And it's a thing that I've become more and more adamant about, is the importance of this improvisational music that we cherish so often, but rarely listen to. We talk about the properties of jazz as if it's a conceptual feat, and it is not. It is a very true reaction to a very real thing that over time has built up a real system that is heard around the world. It may not be on the biggest stages, but for me, that's where the revolution lies. Oftentimes, is in the ways that these musicians work So having relationships with artists who are also close to that ground and want to meet at a new fixed point kind of offers a relationship that we get to discuss today.
Thank you very much. Jason Moran.
Thank you.